Um, so I spent my childhood in Senegal, West Africa. So my parents were serving the Malinke people. Now, who are the Malinke people? Let's talk about that. Um, if you've ever seen, if you've ever read the book Roots, the author of the book Roots traces his ancestry to the Manding. So the Malinke, the Manding, the Mandinka, the Mandinko, and then there's two other language groups that are all very closely related. They are all dialects of each other. So Malinke is the ruling group, if you will. The Keitas were the royal family of the Malinkes, and the other groups were sort of splinter language groups. It's kind of like, you know, Eastern United States versus like Southern United States versus Midwest versus Far West, California, etc. Dialect, the language changes, but you can still understand each other. And so the Manding, the Mandinko, the Mandinka, the Malinke, they can understand each other, but their language is different enough that it is that they are dialects of each other. So we lived with the Malinke. My dad built us a house. I have memories from being 2 years old. In fact, I actually have memories from Bignona. I remember my second birthday. And I think part of why I remember my second birthday is because my birthday gift was a dog. His name was Spike. He was not a purebred Rhodesian Ridgeback. So South African Rhodesian Ridgeback is the breed. He wasn't a purebred, but he had the dark streak. He didn't have the raised ridge, but he had the dark streak down his back. And he was huskier and tougher than any of the other village dogs. All of the other village dogs were smaller and I guess the word is weaker. And he was much stronger. Of course, he also, we fed him. Whereas the village dogs live on scraps, whatever scraps they can scrounge here and there. So he had a lot more. He had a lot more going for him in that sense. And in our village, he was top dog. He just was. and we didn't fence him in. We had a fence around our yard, but he could come and go wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and he did. And for 12 years, well, I take that back. For 9 years, because he was 9 years old when he died. For 9 years, all the babies, all the puppies, all the litters born in that village were his. He was the top dog in Bajula. And one of our best friends, his name was Dauda Keita. He lived, so we had our house, and he lived in the compound that was just up the trail, I don't know, 30 or 40 yards from our house. And when I say compound, they build their houses in family groups. So all of the houses face in kind of a circle, and there will be like pens and fences and I don't know what the right word is. Not granary, not silo, but storage, like a little storage building for food. Also, in the compound. And so Dauda, I don't know when it started exactly, but Spike started going out to the fields with Dauda. And Dauda, early in the morning, Dauda would pass by our fence on his way out, to his fields, and he would whistle, and Spike would go right there with him. And Dauda loved having Spike out there with him because he kept the monkeys away. The monkeys would come in and try to pull up the peanuts, or the other animals would come in and try to dig up the crops and Spike would chase him off. And Dowda loved that. Of course, I mean, who wouldn't? On two occasions in the time that we lived in Senegal, Dowda carried Spike home. Carried him home. Because that dog had no fear. And he got in a tangle with a mother oh, my poor brain. What's the pigs, the warthogs. He would go after the warthogs that were trying to tear up the fields, and he got in a tangle with a couple on two occasions. He got his belly ripped open by warthogs, and Dowda carried him home, and my dad stitched him up, and he lived. I remember this. I was there. I don't know if I was there for the second one, but I was there for the first one. When Dowda brought him home, carried him the whole way, and it was a long walk. That was not a. What impresses me about that, the villagers do not care about the dogs at all. If one of the village dogs disappears and dies, no one bats an eye. They are not pets. They are utility. They are there. They serve a purpose. And when that purpose, if the dog dies, so what? No one cares. No one bats an eye. But Dowda carried Spike home twice. That, to me, speaks volumes about who that man was as a person and how important that dog was to him. Not only for Spike's utility, because he was a very useful dog, but I wonder if Dowda really had, like, the closest that a Malinke could come to having a relationship with a dog. I would say that Dowda had that with Spike. Spike really was supposed to be my dog, but I was a kid. And I had no idea how to develop a relationship with a dog. And there's a lot of that I regret. I wish that I had paid more attention to Spike as a kid, when I was a kid. I wish, so many things that I wish I had done differently with that dog. When I was 11, I was 11 years old. He got in a tangle with a cobra. It was a very, very large cobra. And it bit him and he died. And that was a heartbreak that I have never forgotten. So, New Tribes Mission teams were made out of 4 families, generally. We were teamed with the Cheshires and the Mitchells. The Cheshires were from Pennsylvania. The Mitchells were from Canada. Brent Mitchell, he wanted to be the teacher, and so he was the primary Bible teacher. And Paul wanted to do the translation work, so he was primarily translating the Bible into the Malinke language so that someday they would be able to read it for themselves in their own language. And My dad's job was literacy, teaching them how to read and write their own language so that they would eventually be able to read the Bible in their own language. The very first book that was translated was the book of Romans. Now, it's very, very difficult because they have to scratch out a living. And so it's difficult to find time for what we would call ministry. Now, if you want to talk about real ministry, the day-to-day of relationship building and living with the people, they did that all the time. But when it came to teaching the literacy classes, teaching them the Bible, etc., that was very difficult because they're working, especially during the rainy season. They're working out in the fields. The dry season, not as much. So there's more time during the dry season. But I remember my dad's classes. My dad spent 4 years learning the language. And once he knew the language, then he broke it down into its component sounds, gave them an alphabet, and then created primers and started teaching them how to read and write their own language. Now, in terms of French, some of the folks in the village knew French. Some knew it okay, others not so well. Varying degrees of proficiency with French in the village. And part of that is because it depends on how wealthy your family was as to how much schooling you got. Generally speaking, they would get maybe a 6th grade education, and then that was it. If they were really lucky, their parents would find a family for them to live with in Saraya, so they could go to the government school in Saraya. Later on, toward the end of our time there, the government actually sent a paid teacher to the village to live there and teach the kids, which was phenomenal. And so you learned French. In the government school, you learned French. That's what you learned. And of course, there was no learning your own language. You learned French, period. So, again, you got maybe, if you were lucky, you got a 6th grade education, and that was about it. They generally live on about $400 a month. I'm sorry. That is not correct. $400 a year. So they grow things like peanuts, corn, millet. They can't grow rice because the environment's not right. The Casamance, where I went to boarding school, the Casamance is where the rice is grown because there's lots of water, really big river there. And so that region is kind of the breadbasket, if you will. It's where all the rice is grown. But they would grow cotton and sell the cotton to buy rice. And so that's how they would get rice for the year to live. So rice, peanuts, millet, corn, those were the basic crops that they planted and grew and subsisted on. And so, that's what they had to do. They had to tend the fields. I mentioned that I went to boarding school. So let me back up. So my dad, he taught them how to read and write. And one of his very first students to learn how to read and write Malinke was the village chief. And as soon as the book of Romans was translated and complete, the chief took it and he read it so many times that he actually memorized it front to back. You could begin reading. You could quote anything, any part of the book. You could quote any part of the book of Romans, and he could pick up where you left off and finish it all to the way to the end from memory. So that was one of my dad's first students. Was that was the chief of the chief of Bacula. The chief of Dalafine, a little teeny tiny village, way out, even further in the bush than where we were. He begged my dad for 2 years to come and teach them the Bible, because they live in fear, and they know that what they believe isn't true, but they don't have any alternative. They don't know what else. They don't know what the truth is. And they knew that the missionaries were there to teach them. And they wanted my dad to come and teach them. And so for 2 years, he would send a letter or send someone to go beg my dad, or he would come himself in person to beg my dad to come and teach them the Bible out in Dalafine. And after 2 years, my dad finally said, okay, I can come every other Friday. You got to promise me that you're going to show up, that you're going to be there. I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up for you. I'm going to be there every other Friday. You gotta show up. And they did. And so what they do, when you teach the Bible, you don't start in Matthew, you start in Genesis, because you can't start the story with Jesus. They have no idea who Jesus is. No clue. It means nothing. You start with Genesis and introduce God through what's called chronological teaching. Start with creation and Adam and Eve and the flood and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Joshua, through Judges, through the prophets, and then by the time you've done that, by the time you've gotten through David and Solomon and the exile, and then you get to Matthew 1:1, and they know exactly who Jesus is, because they've been waiting for him. They've been waiting. They know he's coming. And Matthew 1:1, here he is. And then, you go through the ministry years and through Holy Week and the cross and the resurrection and the ascension. And you get to the end of it, and they're just sitting there, and you're like, okay, well, do you believe this? And they're like, well, we're still here, aren't we? If we didn't believe it, we would have left. We wouldn't come back. It's like, so there's no grand, celebratory conversion experience. It's I'm still here. Yes, I believe. Wow. Okay. All right. So, and it's interesting because, I mentioned before that they live their entire lives in fear. To illustrate that, I can, some of the things that my parents and the other missionaries wanted to do was, well, for instance, let me back up a little bit. They have cows, they have sheep, goats, and chickens. Those are the 4 sort of husbandry animals that they keep. None of them are for food. They're all for sacrifice or wealth in one shape or another. For instance, the cattle are basically your wealth. You are as wealthy as the number of cattle you own, period. Sheep and goats and chickens are for sacrifice. Chickens in particular are for sacrifice if a woman wants to get pregnant. She sacrifices a chicken to a particular tree. And sheep and goats are for sacrifice at different ceremonies, weddings, etc. And so the idea was, okay, well, let's, we're not going to change their mind on that. Let's introduce an animal species that they will associate exclusively with food. And, so my mother tried guinea fowl and turkeys. And while they lived, they never produced fertile eggs, never hatched any eggs, for one reason or another. Don't really know why, but they never. And you had to get. My mother made sure that she got turkeys that were the disease-resistant kind, because there's a lot of diseases, and you can't just grab any old animal and throw it out there. It's gonna die. It's gonna die of some disease, and so these turkeys were the disease-resistant species, but for whatever reason they never bred. They never multiplied. She had a tom and 2 hens, and that was, they laid eggs, but they wouldn't hatch. And again, we don't know why. So that didn't work. My dad had a gigantic garden, and I think this is partly where I get my nostalgic love of gardening from. And my dad had this gigantic garden, and what he was doing was trying to experiment with other types of crops. When did they grow well? Did they grow better in the dry season or better in the rainy season? If it was the dry season, how much watering did it need? What crops really did well, what crops didn't do so well. So my dad, he was experimenting with all this, and the idea was he was trying to give them some, again, other types of things that they could do for food or, to make their lives better. The only thing that ever worked was the fruit trees and the banana plants. And the banana plants are an interesting story. They illustrate the level of fear that the people live under. So, if a person wants to start a new field, they have to go out to the land and make a sacrifice to the spirits of that land in order to be allowed to have a field there. Okay? And if anything ever goes wrong, that is perceived as the spirits are judging you, and you have this bad fortune because, you are under the judgment of the spirits and the ancestors. And so they very rarely do anything different than what they have always done, which includes trying new things. So, for instance, I told you that Dowda's compound was just maybe 40 yards or so up the trail from our house, and there was a big cornfield. Yeah, he planted corn every single year in this field, and there was also a cow pen. Kind of, it was like their backyard, and his wife would, she would scrape up the manure, and she would dump it in the same spot in the field every single time. And my dad, every year he would see the corn, and it would be yay high over the whole field, except for this one spot, it'd be above your head. And he kept telling her, why don't you try spreading the manure out, dump it in a different place every time. And she was terrified. She was absolutely terrified to do that because she fully believed that if she did anything different, her house would burn down. The spirits would, judge her, and her house would burn down. And so she wouldn't do it. Well, one year she finally did it, and all the villagers were watching to see if her house was going to burn down or not. Of course, it didn't. Same thing with the banana plants. My dad had very successful banana plants in his garden. And he would go to all of the families and ask them, would you like a banana plant? I will, I'll give you this little seedling, and you plant it in your backyard, and you'll have bananas. And they wouldn't do it. And then finally, one lady, the lady, incidentally, it was Dowda's wife, said, okay, I will take some banana plants. And once again, the whole village watching to see what is going to happen to them, because they're doing this, right? They're They're breaking tradition. They're doing something different. They're not, they've accepted these banana plants. And nothing happened. The house didn't burn down. Or houses, in this case, And the next year, all the ladies wanted banana plants for their families. And the believers, the Malinke believers, told my parents over and over and over again, you have to be patient. They are watching. They are waiting. They want to see what is going to happen to the Malinkes who have chosen to become Christians. One day, they will all believe. That is what they kept telling us. They kept telling my parents, someday they will all believe. You just have to be patient. Someday they will all believe.